Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show for Thursday, October the 21st, 2021. Looks a little bright. That better? Yeah, a little more human, I think. I'm going to start off today by talking about gain of function research, which is a term that I suppose about 1 in 1,000 people knew about until, a year and a half ago. This is from Wikipedia. Gain of function research is a medical research that genetically alters an organism in a way that may enhance the biological functions of gene products. This may include an altered pathogenesis, transmissibility, or host range, i.e. the types of hosts that a microorganism can infect. This research is intended to reveal targets to better predict emerging infectious diseases and to develop vaccines and therapeutics. In virology, gain-of-function research is usually employed with the intention of better understanding current and future pandemics. In vaccine development, gain-of-function research is conducted in the hope of gaining a head start on a virus and being able to develop a vaccine or therapeutic before it emerges. The term gain of function is sometimes applied more narrowly to refer to research which could enable a pandemic, a potential pathogen, to replicate more quickly or cause more harm in humans or other closely related mammals. Some forms of gain of function research, specifically work which involves certain select agent pathogens, can carry inherent biosafety and biosecurity risks and are thus also referred to as dual-use research of concern. To mitigate these risks while allowing the benefits of such research, various governments have mandated that DURC experiments be regulated under additional oversight by institutions and government agencies, such as the National Institutes of Health's Recombinant DNA Advisory Committee. So, let's take a pathogen and make it deadlier and more transmissible to humans. Does that sound like something a sane person would do? As with so much relating to science, one gets the impression that scientists do this simply because they can. Oh, yes, nothing could possibly go wrong, I suppose, unless one of these beefed up pathogens managed to escape from a virology lab, which appears to what has happened in Wuhan, China, at a facility which was notorious for its lax safety standards. I cannot imagine for the life of me why such research is not banned. But again, we must not let science be impeded in any way. Here's a story by Cooper Moran at the StarNewsNetwork.com. The National Institute of Health on Wednesday sent a letter to Representative James Comer, Republican of Kentucky, correcting claims that the U.S. had not funded gain-of-function research in Wuhan. The assertions made by NIH Director Francis Collins and NIAID Director Anthony Fauci detail that EcoHealth Alliance violated certain terms and conditions of the grant. Quote, EcoHealth failed to report this funding right away, as was required by the terms of the grant. EcoHealth is being notified that they have 5 days from today to submit to NIH any and all unpublished data from the experiments and work conducted under this award, the letter stated. Senator Rand Paul, who had famously got into it with the sainted Dr. Fauci, tweeted, "I told you so," doesn't even begin to cover it here. The letter goes on to assert that the COVID-19 virus is not connected to the EcoHealth studies. The controversial research has been the focus of much criticism from lawmakers. Senator Roger Marshall, a Republican of Kansas, on Tuesday introduced the Viral Gain of Function Research Moratorium Act, which would pause all federal research grants to universities and other organizations conducting gain-of-function research. Senator Marshall said, "It's outrageous that a comprehensive global investigation on the origins of COVID-19 has still not been carried out, and with mounting evidence pointing towards the labs in Wuhan, additional guardrails on gain-of-function research must be established to make sure nothing like this ever happens again." For the last decade, Dr. Fauci has funded gain-of-function research on SARS viruses, and until we get to the bottom of the origins of COVID-19, the federal government should not provide another dime in funding for viral gain-of-function research in the name of global health. Senator Paul said, "Even as Dr. Fauci denies it, there is strong evidence that COVID-19 started in a lab in Wuhan. However, if we have learned anything from this pandemic, it's that risky virus-enhancing research, like the type conducted at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, also funded by the US government, is an unnecessary form of science that could lead to the death of millions of people," unquote. Which raises another question. Why is the United States of America sending even one thin dime to China? China is a wealthy country. China is wealthy enough to build and to test hypersonic missiles. But apparently they need the assistance of U.S. taxpayers. It's a story by Isaac Shore in National Review, remembering those journalists who helped cover for Anthony Fauci's gain-of-function misdirection. And it begins a Wednesday letter from a top NIH official. Lawrence Tabak revealed that Dr. Fauci was wrong and Senator Rand Paul was right. Fauci and Paul have sparred over Paul's contention that the NIH had, through a grant issued to EcoHealth, funded gain-of-function research on coronaviruses at the Chinese lab. Paul's argument that NIH money was used to make bat coronaviruses more dangerous and or transmissible in humans has now been confirmed. And Fauci's argument that the research being done doesn't constitute gain-of-function under the NIH's narrow definition has been exposed as a semantic trick. The letter also vindicates Dr. Richard Albright, who told National Review in May that the Wuhan research described in leaked grant proposals epitomizes gain-of-function research. Paul and his argument were pilloried not just by Fauci. "You do not know what you are talking about. If anyone is lying here, Senator, it is you. You are entirely and completely incorrect. The NIH has not ever and does not now fund gain-of-function research in the Wuhan Institute of Virology." But also by many in the media who reflexively sided with Fauci. Well, there's a big shock. CNN's Brianna Keller said in May 2021, "Nothing brings out Senator Paul's propensity to act like an ass like a congressional appearance by Fauci, and that is really saying something. Like Elvis's Kentucky Rain, Rand Paul's COVID BS keeps pouring down, and it's enough to fill the swimming pool in the Senate gym." Washington Post fact checker Glenn Kessler said in May of this year, "We wavered between 2 and 3 Pinocchios, but decided on 2 because there are still enough questions about the work at the Wuhan lab to warrant further scrutiny." Kessler went on to allege that Paul, not Fauci, had created a, quote, false misleading impression by playing with words and using legalistic language that means little to ordinary people, unquote. CNN's Jake Tapper said in July 2021, "I want to start with another kind of misinformation, the constant MAGA media and Republican lawmakers' attacks on health experts, especially Dr. Anthony Fauci." Today on Capitol Hill, Fauci was confronted with an accusation basically from Senator Paul. I don't want to go into the details of what Senator Paul was attacking there and all that. No, why would you want to go into the details of a story as big as this when you have an hour on CNN every weekday to say whatever you like? But there is a bigger picture here. As a health professional, we keep seeing this. Trump allies in Congress and governors' offices and the media are trying to make Fauci a COVID boogeyman. This is a 40-year public servant. He received the Presidential Medal of Freedom. And MSNBC's Ari Melber said in July, "Slanderous, interesting, yeah, and I can understand it. These are very serious issues that people are working on." Steve Menon, also of MSNBC, in July, "Rand Paul keeps doing this. apparently under the impression that there's some value to the pointless exercises. CNN's Brian Stelter said in July, these GOP lawmakers' minds are made up as they call for Fauci's resignation, thereby creating more content for GOP TV. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki said in September, NIH has never approved any research that would make a coronavirus more dangerous to humans. Yes. And the argument by authority. If Dr. Anthony Fauci says something is true and something is false, well, then we know that whatever he says is true and whatever he says is false, because he is Dr. Anthony Fauci. You know, he's a public servant for 40 years. A story from Business News Network. How many boosters will we need? Israel says too soon to know. Researchers from Israel told a panel of U.S. vaccine experts weighing a potential COVID-19 booster dose from Pfizer and BioNTech Friday that it's unclear how long the benefit of such a shot will last. So, Travis Tritt. Apparently, a whole bunch of famous people have never heard of Travis Tritt, the country music singer-songwriter. I've heard of Travis Tritt. I find it difficult to understand how someone in the entertainment business could not know who Travis Tritt is. He has a triple platinum album. He has been a star for decades. This is a story by Ryan Smith at Newsweek. Country musician Travis Tritt has made himself a trending topic on Twitter after blocking a host of celebrities and high-profile figures. And while the singer can now enjoy a timeline without those voices entering his discussions, many of the owners of the blocked accounts claimed they had never even heard of him before he made his bold social media move. The discussion appeared to reach its height Wednesday when Twitter account Patriot Takes posted a poll that asked, have you been blocked by Travis Tritt? Of the 8,074 respondents, 8.8% said they had been blocked by Tritt. Comedian Kathy Griffin shared a screenshot of a Twitter notification that she was blocked as she quipped, I now belong to something so much bigger than myself. Responding to her post, activist and TV personality Mark Lamont Hill wrote, honored to be part of this distinguished group. Also, I had no idea who this person was until now. That sentiment was echoed by Mrs. Doubtfire screenwriter Randy Mayhem Singer, who said, I've never tweeted about or to this person. I have no idea who he is or what songs he sung. I feel like I belong. While he didn't declare whether he was part of the blocked club, actor George Hahn stated, I was today years old when I learned that there is a singer named Travis Tritt. National security analyst Clint Watts also shared a screenshot of his blocked notification as he wrote, feeling more confident I'm on the right side of history. He added, strange thing is I believe I once shook hands with Travis Tritt at a military base or something, and I thought that went fine. Noting that he was well ahead of the latest curve, author John Pavlovitz tweeted, I was blocked by Travis Tritt before it was cool. In 2020, the Whiskey Ain't Workin' singer Tritt revealed that he supported actor James Woods' social media tactic of employing sweeping blocks of Twitter accounts that expressed a left-wing political stance. Reminder, block any 20 accounts a day that have the hashtag resist in their profile. Woods, a conservative actor, tweeted in September 2020. It slows them down and offsets Twitter's shadow banning of conservative accounts. Fellow Republican Tritt then wrote, per my friend James Woods, type resist in your Twitter search bar, block at least 20 of these counts per day. We will soon make them as irrelevant as they have tried to make the rest of us. The musician and actor's 2020 blocking spree prompted a similar response with Better Call Saul star Michael McKean tweeting at the time, Travis Tritt has blocked me, and this is only the second time I've thought about him. Grammy winner Tritt hit headlines Monday when he announced plans to cancel his upcoming shows that are scheduled to take place at venues requiring attendees to wear masks, show proof of COVID-19 vaccination, or a negative test result. My own position on blocking is that I don't do it. have two exceptions for this. The first exception is for people who send me pornography, and the second is for people who have threatened me. I dish it out on Twitter, so it's only right, not to object when people do the same to me. I have found in the years that I've been on Twitter that it would seem that there are hundreds, maybe of thousands of people who have blocked me preemptively. Apparently, there are lists that are sent out by leftists telling which Twitter accounts should be blocked preemptively. These are people that I have never even, it's not just that I haven't communicated with them, I have never even mentioned them on Twitter. So I think that it is rather dubious of Newsweek not to mention this practice by the left, which is well known. Let's go to the chat. Hello to Red Sulphur, No Sleep Till Breezewood, Pennsylvania, and Run Head McNeck, William Hicks, Chokakin 666, Pelcasco 88, Dan, Buddy says, hey Kevin, I'm thinking of having a t-shirt made with the word boo with a little sheet music over it. Don from Beyond says, hi guys, Kevin, I missed you greatly, so glad you're back. I will gladly follow you on whatever platform you decide to use. Well, thank you for your kind words. I appreciate it. Hello to I Judas Fly Chai, a true Greenbird. Let's see. True Greenberg says, Greenbird says, this is not American, sha-la-la-la-la. No Sleep says, I don't know, I was trying to build a boogeyman for 40 plus years of public health failure. 2 years is a rookie number. William Hicks asks, is it simply a case of Dr. Fauci being a neurotic? Hello to Oscar Toe and to Professor Pohl. Как вы поживаете? Did Dr. Pohl's channel get banned? Asks Res Sulphur. I don't know. Steve says blocking people on Twitter is now news. Well, actually, it's been news for a while because people who had been blocked by Donald Trump complained vociferously, and they went to court, and I believe they won. Professor Pohl says that he took his page down. William Hicks asks, so do people who opt not to take the booster shot lose their jobs? Technically, they're vaxxed. How is that going to work? What if you have natural immunity? Will you still get dumped? Said Res Sulphur. My understanding is that yes, you will. Oscar Toe says, any country music fan knows who Travis Tritt is. Right side of history, a despicable cliche, says William Hicks. Well, yeah. I mean, it's very eschatological, isn't it? History doesn't have sides. It doesn't have right sides. It doesn't have wrong sides. It's not moving in one direction inexorably. No. John Gray talked about this kind of belief in his book, 7 Kinds of Atheism, which I recommend. Basically, it's a secular form of monotheism. Okay. James Woods knew the deplatforming game amazingly fast for someone his age, says No Sleep. Red Sulphur says at this rate there will be gulags before we know it. Well, I was talking about that yesterday. Chad Chadson, our valiant moderator, thank you for your service, says I block those who might report me. Well, what I have done, I don't know, in the last year and a half, is that if I'm dealing with people who are likely to try to harm me, I don't comment on their tweets directly. I make a screenshot of the tweet and then comment on that. Oscar Toe says, I'd follow Kevin anywhere. He's like my teacher in Dead Poets Society. Palpicasso 88, KMG, did you have any interesting bum encounters outside your hotel lately? No, not really. I've learned to. I'm constantly scanning the sidewalks, or as soon as even the parking lot, as soon as I go out the front door of my hotel. I have just very unpleasant experience. I've mentioned this before, but it's just enraging to me. And frankly, I think these people should be whipped The question is whether publicly or not. These people, they have dogs, large dogs, homeless people with large dogs, and they leave their dog merds on the sidewalk, which then get stepped on and spread so that it is difficult to avoid it. I've noticed this all over Victoria, actually. I wonder what it's like in other cities. Red Sulphur says, day went well. Some boomer tard staring at a phone almost crashed into me. Then he acted as the aggrieved party, acting tough, LOL. Gave him the European FU gesture. She was angry. A few years ago, I was crossing at a walk sign, and I came very close to being run over by a woman who was turning into the intersection. And I noticed that she was on her phone, and I believe I shook my fist and shouted at her, and she made the, what are you going to do sign, which actually made it worse. You know, I mean, these things happen. Yeah, I guess these things happen when you're not paying attention when you're driving your car through an intersection. Any comment tonight on the ostensible new Trump social media platform he announced? No, I don't, actually. I don't know. I don't understand. Well, I'm not sure I understand the purpose. Perhaps it will be explained to me. No Sleep says the many kinds of atheism are just things you can read in a certain 1,000-page book circulating on revolutions, plus Seraphim's Rose book on nihilism. Okay. Hello to Jim Bowden. Do a hate review of History Boys for the lulz, says Pelcasso88. Yes, I hated that movie. Head McNeck says, I was doing construction at some apartments called Brandon Trails today, and I couldn't stop giggling. Chogokin666 says, I detest impolite people. In Canadian news, this is from Rachel Gilmore at Global News. Canada is launching a standard federal proof of COVID-19 vaccination system, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced today. The vaccine passport will show your name, date of birth, and COVID-19 vaccine history, including which doses you got and when you got them. I'm happy to confirm that all provinces and territories have confirmed that they will be moving forward with a standardized national proof of vaccination. He added that Saskatchewan, Ontario, Quebec, Nova Scotia, and Newfoundland and all three territories have put this national standard into use. You can download it into your phone. You can print it out. You can ask for a copy by mail if you don't have those capacities. But you are now able to show proofs of vaccination immediately in all those provinces, and all other provinces have agreed and are working hard to come online. You notice this? See, we're making your life more convenient. Yes, how? By forcing you to get double jabbed and then compelling you to divulge sensitive medical information to pretty much anyone who asks for it. A very strange story from the Toronto Star. An Ontario mayor who has pushed COVID-19 disinformation may lose part of his pay following a scathing report by an integrity commissioner. West Lincoln Mayor David Bilsma is one of a small band of politicians in the fiercely conservative boo communities of Western Niagara who have embraced anti-vaccination or anti-lockdown rhetoric. He is the only one to face sanctions from the political bodies he is part of. First, his own council stripped him of most of his powers, and now the regional council says that his mayoralty entitles him to sit on will consider suspending his pay. Bilsma's decision this year to ask a St. Catharines woman, Emily Spanton, through Facebook, if the COVID-19 vaccine affected her menstruation was alarmingly invasive. Oh, invasive. We're worried about being invasive now, are we? Arguably insulting, ditto, and irresponsible, Niagara Region's Integrity Commissioner found in an October 8th report. Bilsma and Spanton are only acquaintances, and his question leaned on conspiracy theories circulating on social media about vaccines harming a woman's reproductive system. Following Spanton's tweet about the message in May, West Lincoln Town Council stripped Bylsma of all his committee positions, cutting him off from critical debates and decisions about town issues. Now, interim Integrity Commissioner Michael Maynard has recommended the Regional Council, where Bylsma also sits as a member, suspend Bylsma's pay for at least 7 days. The council has the authority to strip him of pay for as many as 90 days. This was not the first time Bylsma has been censured for COVID-19 disinformation activities. Username available. In April, after Bylsma was a featured speaker at an anti-lockdown rally in St. Catharines, the town council removed Bylsma from its emergency operations committee and barred him from being involved in any public statements from the town about the pandemic. Maynard launched this investigation after Bylsma's regional colleague, St. Catharines Regional Councillor Laura Ip, filed a complaint. In it, Ip said Bylsma had misused his position of authority and is, quote, undermining the necessity of public health measures and the delivery of vaccines by our public health staff by attempting to gather information to fuel his conspiracy theory about vaccines. The report said that although Bylsma had apologized for his message to Spanton, his history of violating the code of conduct suggests a more stringent punishment than a mere reprimand is required. Yes, and way down in the story, Bylsma told Maynard his message to Spanton was private and it was only made public by her, and he gave her the option of not replying to the message. Perhaps you could put that information near the top of the story. So apparently mayors in this region of Ontario they have no freedom of speech even in private communications. How about that? How about that? And what are we going to talk about next? Just give me a second here. Okay, let's go to William Briggs and his column today. He says, experts have determined that you are not allowed to fear for your safety in other but approved ways. You may fear the corona doom and even if, as with most, I can't say this bit, as for those who have already had the disease and recovered, but you may not fear the vaccine, even despite the risk. Well, yes, this is for the time being, I hope to change this by Monday. This is the Cripsis cast. So I should just say that the experts are right. The experts are right about COVID-19. The experts are always right. And the fact that the advice or a policy coming from the experts often changes radically from month to month, week to week, or even day to day, that is the way of science. And anyone who disagrees with science over anything at any time is a conspiracy theorist, a traitor, and quite possibly implicated in murder. I just thought I'd let everyone know. Let everyone know. Let's see. A certain fellow called Alex. I'll just recommend alexberenson.substack.com. I can't read anything from his Substack for reasons which you well know. Let's take a look at dailyskeptic.org. Again, it's amusing to me that people used to boast about being skeptics. Wasn't there a magazine for humanists, atheists called Skeptic? Wasn't it called something like that? But now being a skeptic is a bad thing. Well, it's this is a whom question. The NHS isn't facing another COVID crisis, and Sajid Javid knows it, writes Fraser Nelson in The Telegraph. NHS has 6,000 spare beds for COVID patients. GPs in England threaten industrial action over in-person appointments. Family doctors reject the plan to force them to see any patient who wants a face-to-face appointment, reports The Guardian. And what happened to Dr. Jay Bhattacharya on 19 months of COVID. That is on the Uncommon Knowledge podcast. The COVID Catholic parallel, been here before. We see unprecedented use of unprecedented today, but perhaps the entire phenomenon we are experiencing is not unprecedented, writes Gregory Sams. And they're talking about another lockdown in Britain. Apparently, it seems inevitable. They have them well trained there. The threat of lockdown hangs like a sword of Damocles, writes Laura Dodsworth. I reviewed Laura Dodsworth's book a few weeks ago, and I highly recommend it. There's a good piece in the Telegraph today by Laura Dodsworth, who argues that the fact that the government is holding off on imposing Plan B restrictions at this point paints only one side of the picture. While new measures haven't yet been introduced, or rather old failed measures haven't yet been reintroduced, the threat of lockdown hangs like a sword of Damocles, nudging us into courses of action we wouldn't otherwise take. To put it simply, eat your vegetables, kids, or you'll lose your right to dessert. Dodsworth writes, there's a chill in the air, not from the changing seasons, it's still fairly balmy, but from the latest attempts to orchestrate a subtle psychological manipulation of us all. About 18 months ago, in the lockdown summer of 2020, I started to argue that the government's response to COVID is driven not so much by medical science or epidemiology, but instead by the psychological insights of behavioral scientists. Again, since the experts are always right, Laura Dodsworth must be wrong. In my book, A State of Fear, How the UK Government Weaponized Fear During the COVID Pandemic, I argue that controversial nudge theory lies at the heart of Westminster's response. It refers to sneaky attempts to prime, prepare, and prod us into their desired mindset and course of action without us ever realizing we are being coerced. Again, I must point out on the Cripsis cast that public health experts, or latrine wallahs, as I like to call them, have only our best interests in heart. And they must be trusted always. If another lockdown is imposed or vaccine passports are introduced, the government will use the almost unlimited powers granted to it by the Public Health Act. That is an act which was passed in 1984. And I wonder how many MPs at the time realized the implications, possible implications of the bill that they had approved. I rather suspect that they gave it no thought at all. And, okay, and there's a new Delta subvariant, AY.4.2. Not very catchy, would you say? Not very catchy at all. COVID and religion. I mean, one can't help but think of, one's view of death in light of the fact that we have all been scared to death for a year and a half now. And there is a fine essay by Joy Pullman at thefederalist.com. Shaming people for dying by accident is a bit twisted, but it might make sense if you believe life is over once a person stops breathing, and so cling to the illusion of human control over death to avoid the terror of acknowledging that's impossible. It's such pagan assumptions driving the ridiculous number of news articles with fear porn titles like these. Kansas City area official who died from COVID was unvaccinated, felt he was immune. Unvaccinated husband and wife die of COVID-19, leaving 5 children behind. Unvaccinated father inspired other family members to get shot before dying from COVID. Bride planning funeral instead of wedding after unvaccinated groom dies from COVID. Christian teaching diametrically opposed the underlying theology pushed in such articles and in many other popular COVID narratives. That's true despite the appearance generated by the majority of Western churches prioritizing obedience to men instead of to God by shutting themselves down over COVID-19. Doing so contradicts numerous clear commands of Scripture. It's a mark of the weakness of the Western church that more church leaders have not proclaimed this to the world by now. They're left standing for basics of the faith to far too few strong pastors, such as John MacArthur and Mark Deaver. Christians believe that life and death belong entirely to God. There is nothing we can do to make our days on earth 1 second longer or shorter. Quote, all the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be, says the psalmist. For if we live to the Lord, and if we die to the Lord. So then, whether we live or whether we die, we are the Lord's, says St. Paul in Romans 14:8. For another thing, for Christians, death is good. Yes, death is also an evil. Its existence is a result of sin. But thanks be to God, Jesus Christ has redeemed even death in his resurrection. Christ has transformed death into a portal to eternal life for Christians. What Satan meant for evil, God has transformed into good. Christian faith makes it very clear that death, while sad to those left behind and a tragic consequence of human sin, is now good for all who believe in Christ. A Christian funeral is a cause for rejoicing, albeit understandably through tears from those of us temporarily left behind. Well, I'll have more to say on this subject in about an hour on Theater Thursday when I discuss Carl Theodore Dreyer's Ordet, which means the word. Yes, we are of good courage, and we would rather be away from the body and at home with the Lord, says the second book of Corinthians 5:8. This is not a small or unclear doctrine. It is repeated over and over again in Scripture. It flatly rejects the heathen idea that death is to be avoided at all cost. The Christian church has always faced a stronger prospect of suffering and death because the gate is wide and the way is easy that leads to destruction, and those who enter by it are many. We are instructed to be not driven by consensus and social comfort, but the truth as God has given it to us in his word. Jesus emphasizes, in the world you have tribulation, but be of good cheer. I have overcome the world. I have to say that, looking at the response to my church, the Roman Catholic Church, to COVID-19, it's clear that the leaders, or even parish priests, they no longer believe in any of this. No, we're shutting down our churches because someone might get sick by attending, and that is far more important than people attending Mass or receiving the sacraments. No. See, I don't know. What is it? A form of entertainment, a form of diversion? But, whatever Latrine Wallace have to say is far, far more important. And, oh, yes, let's talk about Netflix and Dave Chappelle. This is from Alex Vega and Lynn Elber at the Associated Press. Chappelle special spurs Netflix walkout, trans lives matter. Dateline Los Angeles, Netflix employee who walked out Wednesday in protest of Dave Chappelle's special and his anti-transgender comments were joined by allies who chanted trans lives matter, getting pushback from counter-protesters who also showed up. A pre-noon rally at a Netflix office studio complex drew about 100 people, most on the side of an estimated 30 workers at the streaming giant that joined in afterward. Some were willing to identify themselves as Netflix employees, but all declined to provide their names. Joey Soloway, creator of the groundbreaking Emmy-winning comedy Transparent, was among the speakers at the rally. Chappelle's decision to share, quote, his outrage as comedic humiliation in front of thousands of people and then broadcasting it to hundreds of millions of people is infinitely amplified gender violence, unquote, they said. I want trans representation on the Netflix board this effing week, the writer-director said. Ashley Marie Preston, an activist and the event's organizer, addressed the rally and spoke to the Associated Press afterward. She said that calling out Chappelle for his remarks wasn't enough. It was important to shift the focus to the people that signed the checks because Dave Chappelle doesn't sign checks, Netflix does, Preston said. If we have companies like Netflix who aren't listening to their employees, who are forcing their employees to participate in their own oppression, that's unacceptable. We're here to keep people accountable. We are not going anywhere, she said, adding that efforts are underway to start a dialogue with Netflix executives. There were a few moments of shoving and pushing among the competing demonstrators, but the conflict was mostly limited to a war of words. Leia Figueroa, a student from Los Angeles, doesn't work at Netflix, but said she wanted to back the walkout. While the streaming service offers positive fare for the alphabet people community, she said it's having it both ways by also offering a show like Chappelle's that includes disparaging comments about trans women. If Netflix wants to be an apolitical platform, then they should be that, Figueroa said. But they're saying things like Black Lives Matter and we don't stand for transphobia. If you say things like that, then you have to be vetting all your content to reflect your values. As she spoke, a protester shouted, "We like jokes. I like funny jokes, and transphobia is not a joke," Figueroa replied. Melissa Cohen, a former journalist, said she was on hand to support Netflix's decision not to pull the special. "We want to show that there isn't unanimous support about transgender ideology when it comes to Netflix viewers," she said. She was among about a dozen people who carried placards reading, "Free speech is a right and truth is not transphobic." Elliot Page, who stars in Netflix's The Umbrella Academy and is transgender, tweeted that he stands with the trans, non-binary, and people of color working at Netflix who are fighting for more and better trans stories and a more inclusive workplace. Yes. Oh, harm reduction is another demand, which according to the list includes acknowledgement of what it called Netflix's responsibility for this harm from transphobic content, and in particular harm to the Black trans community. It also called for disclaimers to flag content that includes transphobic language, misogyny, homophobia, and hate speech. In a statement, the media watchdog group GLAAD, this is one of those groups like the NAACP and NARAL, that it used to be an initialism or an acronym, and they just dropped that. It's just GLAAD now. It used to be the Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Discrimination. Oh, yes, that GLAAD said it salutes the Netflix's employees, allies, and alphabet people and Black advocates calling for accountability and change within Netflix and the entertainment industry as a whole. Netflix ran into a buzzsaw of criticism, not only with the special, but in how internal memos responded to employees' concerns, including co-CEO Ted Sarandos's assertion that content on screen doesn't directly translate to real-world harm. Sarandos also wrote that Netflix doesn't allow titles that are designed to incite hate or violence, and we don't believe The Closer crosses that line. In interviews Tuesday, Sarandos said he failed to recognize that a group of our employees was really hurting, as he told the Wall Street Journal, and that his comment about the effect on TV on viewers was an oversimplification. Tara Field, or Terror Field, get it? Get it? Who identifies herself on Twitter as a senior software engineer at Netflix and as trans, posted tweets critical of Chappelle's special immediately after it aired, and the comments were widely shared. In her post, Field said that the comic was being criticized not because his remarks are offensive, but for the harm they do to the trans community, especially Black women. Field included a list of trans and non-binary men and women who she said had been killed, adding in each case that the victim, quote, is not offended, unquote. Well, okay, so it's not enough to be trans. Black trans people are specialer than the rest. I've read that about 45% of Black transsexuals are HIV positive, which probably has something to do with the fact that a great many of them are prostitutes or sex workers, as we're enjoined to call them now. And one of the reasons why they are sometimes murdered is because, well, of crypsis, that one can present, as the kids like to say, as a woman while, having a female penis. And when you are a sex worker and it's about to get down to the nitty gritty and the female penis makes its appearance, a great many men become angry and sometimes violent, sometimes murderously. So I don't understand this Sarandos fellow. These people, these Netflix trans employees are obviously the most obnoxious, objectionable, and troublesome employees that he has. That everything must be seen through a trans lens. If these people don't like working at Netflix, then let them leave. I believe there was a software company, coding company, perhaps listeners can remind me what it was, they had people, I don't know, was it Alphabet people, furious at them. And the CEO said, bye-bye, here's a severance check. The employees at Netflix, or the trans employees at Netflix, believe they have the plenary power to determine programming at that network. They do not. And I suppose this is an important test case, because if Netflix caves in any way to this, there'll be no stopping the trans people. They'll just make, there's never anything as a final demand with those people. We've seen this with the rest of the alphabet people. So-called conservatives say, oh, we'll do, look, okay, full legal equality, sure, we'll give them that. Because, what more could they want? Gay adoption, sure, we'll give them that. What more could they want? Gay marriage, okay, we'll give them that. What more could they want? Mandatory alphabet people propaganda from kindergarten onwards. I don't know that they're quite there yet, but sure, we'll give them that. What more could they want? Well, as I've said in the past, and I'll repeat now, if it hasn't already happened, it will soon, that alphabet people advocates will say, what do you mean you're heterosexual? Exclusively so. Have you ever had sex with a person of the same gender? You haven't. So how would you know whether you like it or not? And teachers, beginning from kindergarten onwards, will be telling their students that they have a duty to engage in alphabet people sex. And if they don't, they are bigots and quite possibly white supremacists, I suppose. Let's see what an entertainment lawyer, popular writer on the entertainment business, Bob Lefsetz, says. It's not going to hurt Netflix. Netflix is too big, too desirable, too embedded in people's lives to be abandoned, to be canceled. In this way, it's like Amazon or Walmart or Facebook. We constantly hear about their deleterious effects. Boycotts are initiated, but the enterprise is just too good. It fulfills a need that the public can't get satisfied elsewhere. Not that I've seen Chappelle's special. Do I have a problem with Chappelle's success? Of course not. But do I think he should be censored? Of course not. But then it gets more complicated. If Netflix fires Chappelle, he'll just go somewhere else for more money. Chappelle is a cornerstone of the outlet's programming, the linchpin of its comedy division, a halo that brings other comedians into the fold. Remember when all comedy was on HBO? Now it's on Netflix. And it could go somewhere else, assuming someone was willing to pay. And if you're building a company, if you're cheap, you're doomed. So Chappelle makes anti-trans comments. Well, the truth is trans people are not a majority of the public, which you might think based on the attention they receive. Then again, that does not mean they don't deserve protection. How many handicapped people are there? But we still have cutouts in sidewalks and bars, in bathroom stalls, and that's what a good society does, takes care of all its citizens. That's an interesting, yes, a man who can't use his legs because he was in a car accident, compared to a man who decides that he was misgendered at birth and will now take various procedures to become a woman. I don't really think that's a valid comparison. But that does not mean Chappelle's words have no influence. It has been established that homophobia is rampant in the Black community. Oh, really? I'm shocked. What an appalling situation. By putting down, making fun of trans people, you're playing into people's biases. How can it be that Morgan Wallen is canceled for unconsciously using the N-word, and Chappelle is quite consciously beating up on minorities and goes scot-free? Wallen's penalty was too tough. Chappelle is not penalized at all. And then he mentions Kanye West, or Ye, or Ye, I don't know how, Y-E, I don't know how that's pronounced, as we're now supposed to call him. This guy is bipolar, and the public just sits by and watches the train wreck. So Chappelle is pouring gas on the fire, and the network's brass are clueless. This is what happens when you hang in the ivory tower too long. You don't know how people outside it will think. Oh, so no one at Netflix understood that Dave Chappelle doing anything less than grovel to the trans people was going to result in their fury. Come on, they know. What should Netflix do? Bob Lefsetz adds. I'm not exactly sure, but there is a continuum between letting Chappelle's special air unfettered and canceling it, maybe a warning in front. That's a cliche at this point, but we need to remind people that all this is comedy. These are serious issues. Just don't buy the opinion lock, stock, and barrel. Thank you for that, Bob. Yes, I'd always labored under the misapprehension that if someone says something on television, not only must it be true, that I must adopt that opinion. You have to remind people of the dangers, the pitfalls. You should be able to make fun of anything, but the truth is Chappelle's opinions are beyond jokes. Okay. And, he takes a shot at Donald Trump and Laura Ingraham and Tucker Carlson. Let's see, Colin Powell, not a hero. Vaccines don't work because he died after getting inoculated. Of course, the issue is much more complicated than that. If you have blood cancer like multiple myeloma, you are immune compromised. It's funny, you notice this 180 turn on comorbidities. Comorbidities aren't important, said a professor at the University of Alberta, a physician. And there was a furious response to this, and then he deleted the tweet. So comorbidities they don't exist, they're not important, or suddenly they are important. Playing both ends against the middle. Okay, so some employees did identify themselves, and the Twitter site Clown World at @NCrankie, capital NKRANKIE, had a video of some of the Netflix trans staff who have walked out, and they begin with a remarkable figure of a person. It's impossible to parody now. If this were some site like the Babylon Bee, and they got an actor to put on a fat suit and put on a tiny purple wig that looks like a pillbox hat, and say this is a trans woman, the response would be outrage. How dare you? You're mocking us. We're not all freaks, But this person talks at some length and explains that this person has two names. And one of the names is something Eureka or something like that. I don't know. I think there should be some. Do you ever notice that the trans people, the male to female variety, they all pick strange names, often outrageous names. Like they wouldn't ever pick a name like Jennifer or Anne or Sally or anything like that. It'd also be something like Terrafield. Ooh, I'm a scary person. Again, apparently it's not enough to go from being, misgendered at birth to adopting a female identity. One must have a name that screams for attention as well. And okay, slightly related news. This is from Tommy Taylor at the Daily Mail. A colorist who helps produce DC's Superman comics says he is quitting over a decision to make the Man of Steel bisexual and a change to the iconic comics patriotic slogan. Gabe Altabe announced he was quitting his position on a YouTube live stream with fellow former DC Comics worker Ethan Van Sciver, October 13th. The outgoing colorist, who says he'll serve out his contract with DC before leaving, said in the podcast, "I'm tired of this shit," in response to the decision to make the Man of Steel bisexual. Altabe also called the company's decision to scrap the old Superman slogan, "Truth, Justice, and the American Way," in favor of truth, justice, and a better tomorrow, effing nonsense. And I'm looking at a picture, which has been, shoved down my throat on thousands of sites. There is Superman, or Jonathan Superman, Superman's son. You know, Vladimir Nabokov once wrote I don't know whether this is ever published, but he once wrote a hilarious short story about the impossibility of Superman, uh, creating another person, procreating through sexual intercourse. I'm not going to explain why this would be impossible for Superman. I'll simply say it's disgusting. It's hilarious, but also disgusting. And so Superman is kissing a Japanese American boy with purple hair, because of course, of course. Why is DC doing this? Because they can, I suppose, but they want people have a certain idea of Superman, and they're determined to destroy that. I mean, I stopped reading comics when I was, I think, 11 years old, but I read DC Comics, so I have a certain idea of what Superman stands for. I watched the TV show, and the TV show was a disappointment to me because I guess the TV show, it didn't have much of a budget, and of course, TVs were black and white and small tubes. So instead of, flying around the world or, doing amazing stuff, Superman was breaking up small-time criminal gangs. Again, when I was told that Superman didn't really exist, I was distraught. So DC is doing this in order to make people who have, fond memories of Superman miserable. There is no escape. You think that, going to the comic world will give you an escape? No, there is no escape because you don't deserve an escape. This is from Amanda Prestigiacomo at the Daily Wire. U.S. Assistant Secretary for Health Rachel Levine, who identifies as a transgender female, claimed the title of the first female four-star officer in a video boasting about diversity for the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. I'm honored to serve as the first female four-star officer of the U.S. Public Health Service Commission Corps and the first openly transgender four-star officer to serve across any of the 8 uniformed services, Levine said in the video. This is a momentous occasion, Levine said, and I'm honored to take this role for the impact that I can make and for the historic nature of what it symbolizes. I stand on the shoulders of those alphabet people individuals who came before me, both those known and unknown. May this appointment today be the first of many more to come as we create a diverse and more inclusive future. Diversity makes us stronger, Levine asserted. Each person has a different perspective and different strengths that they bring to make the whole community stronger. The time is now for our country to continue to move the bar forward for diversity, and I am proud to wear this uniform and answer that call. She doesn't mean that. Okay, she means the bit about diversity making us stronger. Each person has a different perspective that they bring to the whole community, which makes it stronger. How about Dave Chappelle? Dave Chappelle has a different perspective, but he has been told by trans employees, by Netflix, and many, many people in the media and in politics that he should just shut his mouth because we don't want your different perspective, Dave. Diversity makes us stronger. It's just a shibboleth. There is absolutely no evidence for this. And of course, a famous book called Bowling Alone was written about it. And the author of this book, he suppressed his own research for some time because he was afraid of it and its implications. What he discovered was that diversity makes people weaker, and it makes people suspicious, not only of people who are different from them, but even of their own people. That is to say, the diversity destroys community. But no, it's diversity. Diversity makes everything better, we are told. And some economic news. This is from the Committee to Unleash Prosperity. This week's report on earnings and inflation from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, usual weekly earnings summary, contains bad news for workers. Median weekly earnings in the third quarter of 2021 or $1,003, just 0.7% higher than a year earlier. Inflation was 5.3% over the same time period. So after adjusting for inflation, workers are losing $50 a week under Biden. We've been predicting that gas will go to $5 a gallon in the next month, and food prices are expected to rise by 10% over roughly the same time period. All this makes a mockery of the Biden administration claim that the higher inflation is a sign of a strong economy. This is like saying obesity is a sign of affluence and good health. I quoted from a piece written by Dominic Sandbrook, the English historian, a couple of days ago, talking about the Britain's inflation crisis of the 1970s. What happened in Britain was that rises in prices were met with rises in wages, just like this, like this, like this, like this, and endlessly so. Of course, the difference between then and now is that England had very strong trade unions then. America had very strong trade unions in the 1970s. The union movement has been effectively emasculated in Britain and the United States, except for, public service workers. And why these people have unions at all is an interesting question. The article, so that is to say, oh, yes, okay, so prices are rising rapidly. I'll just get a pay rise. No, you're not going to get a pay rise. Not if you're Joe Sixpack. Is it time to mention the dreaded S word, stagflation? This is deeply worrisome. The latest GDP Now estimates for the third quarter, July through September of 21, show growth slowing to a snail's pace of 0.2%. That's barely treading water, and a quick slowdown from the 6% growth of the economy that Biden inherited from Trump. The combination of 5 to 6% inflation and near zero growth is called stagflation. When inflation ramps up, real growth stalls. Had to go back to the Jimmy Carter years to find that definition. Well, it's obvious. You see the GDP going down to 0.2%. If inflation were properly calculated in the United States, we would see the GDP shrinking and shrinking substantially. And in more diversity news, during these troubled times, this is from KPIX CBS San Francisco. During these troubled times, yes, the story actually begins like that. With Asian Americans continuing to endure physical and verbal attacks across the nation, racist comments by a conservative YouTube host targeting KPIX 5 reporter Betty Yu garnered outrage from a community pushed to the edge. Steven Crowder made the comments during a segment on his online show Wednesday. It began as an attack on the dispute between San Francisco health officials and In-N-Out Burgers over a local COVID ordinance to check customers' vaccination status. Apparently, the people who write for this website don't know English, and they don't have editors. How can one make an attack on a dispute between two parties? The veteran award-winning journalist was covering this story. After an opening comment or two, Crowder's rant turned into a racist attack on Yu because of her Asian American heritage. The racist comments came after Yu became one of the leading reporters on the rise of attacks on Asian Americans in the Bay Area, her stories elevating local awareness of the stunning and shameful rise in racially based crime. Now, she too had become a target of race attacks, and the outrage was immediate. Twitter officials were notified of the racist and disturbing nature of the posting. From a page dedicated to reporting possible violations by Crowder to the San Francisco-based social media giant, there were several reports on Crowder and his hateful posts. CBS television station's president Jennifer Mitchell and KPIX TV San Francisco president GM Kevin Walsh also voiced their support of Yu and condemned the attack. SAG-AFTRA weighed in. As you might imagine, her colleagues who have admired Yu's reporting over the years and others on social media added their anger and support. This is just appalling and disgusting. Nobody should be treated this way. We stand by you, etc., etc. So what is it that Steven Crowder said? Well, the story doesn't mention it. Was it really so foul that it couldn't be paraphrased, what he said? What he said was that Betty Yu has an aggressively Asian face. Yeah, I know. Pretty shocking, right? I know several of you have probably fainted over hearing this. Of course, it is a commonplace. It's barely mentionable that white people are routinely attacked for physical attributes, for being vanilla, for being white bread, for being boring, for not being able to dance, having no sense of rhythm, etc., etc., etc. But I suppose we must all show our solidarity for poor, tormented Betty Yu. And a quick look at the chat before I move on to Joseph Tainter. Ashley Man Bravo, hello. You will own nothing, you will be happy, ah? Yes. The whole burn and rebuild from the ashes thing is basically sati as a form of gnosis as political control, says No Sleep. Jonathan Pohl says, my union is still strong, but I am in the public sector. Okay. All right, I'm not going to repeat that. I wish they would be, no, I can't repeat that either. Polygon says, build back better equals destroy what's left of the middle class and completely obliterate the working class. Okay, Steve corrects me. Yes, I'm sorry I got this wrong, but here's the correct information. Bowling alone actually came out a few years before Putnam's diversity study. Bowling was about the decline of clubs and civic organizations. Quite right. Quite right. Sorry for the error. Superman was also always subversive of WASP society, says Professor Pohl. I've seen that argument made. I don't know that I buy it. Oscar Toe says, wouldn't it be rather easy to just fix climate change in the Superman universe? I mean, the dude can fly, among other magical abilities. I saw Superman was protesting climate change, says Oscar Toe. Couldn't he use his super breath or his superpowers to extract all the carbon and, you know, send it off to Jupiter or some such place, or even beyond the solar system? Of course, you don't want to go down that hole. You know, if Superman can do this, then, you know, well, what can't Superman do? I was amused as a boy that, you know, I used to buy the Justice League of America, and Batman is part of the Justice League of America, and he doesn't have any superpowers. He just has gadgets and bravery. But in order for him to, you know, to ride along, as it were, with the other members of the JLA, they gave him a belt which allowed him to fly. Yeah, what is the nature of that propulsion? Of course, you don't want to think too much about those things. Even the worst internet racist would swoon and faint like a Victorian woman if Kanye, it's Ye or Ye now, smiled at him. Yeah, maybe. I mean, you know, when he supported Trump, that was beyond the pale. And of course, before that, there was marrying Kim Kardashian. So Bob Lefsetz says that Kanye West is bipolar, formerly known as manic depressive. What, is he just noticing that now? You know, I figured this out about 15 years ago. Red Sulfur says Assad and Saddam were actually good for Christians. Just ask them. Absolutely true. Red Sulfur, earlier it said U.S. wars in the Middle East decimated Christian communities all over Iraq and Syria. Well, basically they led to, you know, ethnic cleansing. Hello to Cognitive Dissonant and 1467 Masterson Wilson. Okay, so let's go back to Joseph Tainter. And again, he's looking at various theories explaining collapse. And this section is called Insufficient Response to Circumstances. The basic factor that unites the rather disparate arguments under this theme is the notion that fundamental limitations of social, political, and economic systems prevent an appropriate response to circumstances, and this makes collapse inevitable. Two of the major views considered here, well known in the history of anthropology, are those of Betty Meggers regarding environmental limitations to civilization, and Elman Service on the law of evolutionary potential. Toynbee's challenge and response theory is not included at this point. Meggers' argument was simple. More productive environments can produce more complex societies. More specifically, quote, the level to which a culture can develop is dependent upon the agricultural potentiality of the environment it occupies, unquote. As this potentiality improves, culture will advance. Classifying tropical rainforest as inadequate in this regard, Meggers encountered the problem of the Maya. Her solution, Mayan civilization must have been introduced from elsewhere, and the history of Mayan occupation should represent decline or disintegration. Introduce a civilization into an environment that is inappropriate, and ultimately the environment will win. Mayan society could not respond appropriately to its circumstances. Despite serious criticism, this argument continues to find expression. Occasionally, one suspects by authors who are unaware of their intellectual linkage to Meggers. Both Sabloff and Webb present up-to-date variations linking the Mayan environment with events elsewhere in Mesoamerica as sources of collapse. These prominent Mayan scholars are, of course, fully aware of Meggers' theory and of recent ideas derived from it. Stewart and Gauthier argue, similarly, for the Chacoan collapse, that the height of Chacoan complexity was impossible to sustain in an arid environment. A similar view argues, sometimes implicitly, that complex societies are unstable, not just in certain kinds of environments, but inherently. Kent Flannery and Roy Rappaport are the best-known proponents of this line of reasoning. These authors suggest that more complex societies are more closely interlinked, with greater mutual influences among parts. Self-sufficiency and autonomy of local systems are reduced as specialization increases. As special-purpose subsystems become increasingly differentiated, stability declines. Disruptions occurring anywhere will be spread everywhere, whereas in less complex settings, a society would be cushioned against disruption by less specialization, less interlinkage among parts, and greater time delays between cause and ultimate outcome. Civilization itself, i.e. great complexity, to Rappaport, may be maladaptive. Quote, civilization has emerged only recently in the past 6,000 years or so, and it may yet prove to be an unsuccessful experiment, unquote. An intriguing variation on this last theme has been developed by Phillips. In a statement reminiscent of Gibbon's views on the Roman Empire, Phillips suggests that, quote, in a sense, the problem is not that states collapse, for this happens constantly, but rather that some states last so long, unquote. Phillips' argument is that it takes time for a newly dominant state to use all its resources efficiency, which he defines as high output or return per unit investment. Efficiency, so defined, though, leads to inflexibility and resource allocation. The mechanism is this. A newly dominant state controls a large territorial base, but has not yet developed or come to depend on complex institutions that will derive a significant return for this resource base. In such situations, a large proportion of the new resources will always be used in non-critical or low-return ways, such as monumental architecture. This has the consequence of creating a hidden resource reserve that can be used for emergencies, for such non-critical activities are suspendable in a crisis. Well, that brings up an interesting point. I suppose many people, probably including myself, believed that after the near destruction of the world economy in 2007, 2008, when it became clear that capitalism was no longer producing a surplus, that, performance, poets, performative art, the vast array of diversity consultants and the like, well, we do away with them because we can't afford them anymore. Of course, they're also, useless or worse than useless, but no, it went on ahead regardless. I had really thought that we were going to see the last of, say, Amanda Palmer after this. Nope, but she's still around. We are borrowing money now in order to fund parasitism. Back to Tainter. But through time, social and political institutions emerged that use this resource base more fully, in Phillips's terminology, efficiently. Eventually, most resources are allocated to support efficient institutions, political offices and the like, leaving no reserves or flexibility in resource allocation. The dominant center is then left susceptible to disruptions, so that historical accident alone is sufficient to touch off major failures. A crisis like a revolt, which a newly dominant state would easily control, becomes an insurmountable problem for a more efficient society that lacks reserves. Although formulated in regard to Mesoamerica, this argument has applicability elsewhere. The later Roman Empire, for example, succumbed to catastrophes, the like of which had been overcome by the early Republic. This argument is strongly reminiscent of that of Shepherd Clow, who suggested that weakness and collapse can be caused by diverting resources from investment in capital to expenditures on art and knowledge. As more resources are devoted to artistic achievement, the share available for creating economic well-being diminishes, as does the society's strength. Thus, the elements that define civilization leads to its demise. The collapses of Egypt in the first intermediate period and of Rome are explained accordingly. Thus, to Clow and to Phillips, complex societies are not initially unstable, but eventually become so. And I'll have more from Joseph Tainter tomorrow. I want to talk now about Eric Symmore, who is being touted as perhaps the next president of France. And of course, that has made many people unhappy, because Symmore is an unapologetic right-winger. I'll read from Wikipedia. He was born in 1958. He's a French political journalist, essayist, writer, and television pundit. From 2019 to 2021, he was the presenter of Face à l'Info on CNews. Mainstream news organizations characterize Symmore as far-right and right-wing, while Symmore politically self-identifies as a Gaullist and a Bonapartist. And yes, he has been, prosecuted. Let's see. Frequently sued for controversial statements by political opponents. He has been fined 2 times for provocation of racial discrimination and for provocation of hate against Muslims, and acquitted 6 times. He is of Algerian background, and his parents, who were Jews, fled Algeria in 1958 after the Muslims, the Arabs, had come to power. The new rulers of Algeria made it known in a famous statement, some advice for the so-called pieds noirs, the black feet, the suitcase or the coffin. Get out now or we will kill you. And about 1 million of them left very quickly. I suspect that this has something to do with Symmore's opinions, because after Algeria was conquered by France, the Jews were given equality, which they had not enjoyed under Muslim rule. But the New York Times has noticed this phenomenon, and Roger Cohen, who I have been following for years and years and years, who is defiantly an anti-nationalist. Interesting to see what he has to say. The piece, October the 15th, he writes, most schools throughout France observed a minute of silence Friday in remembrance of Samuel Paty, a teacher whose attempt to illustrate free speech to his students led to his beheading a year ago by an Islamist fanatic. As a history teacher, Paty was responsible for teaching civics. To illustrate the right to blasphemy, free speech, and freedom of conscience, he showed caricatures of the Prophet Muhammad, setting in motion a swirl of lies and rumor that ended in his beheading. The police investigation revealed that the girl who told her father, a Brahmin Chinina, a false version of what had taken place in the class and prompted the online frenzy that led to the killing had not been in the class at all. The girl told the police that Paty had questioned all students on their religious allegiance, let Muslims know that they could leave because they would be shocked, and then ordered her out of the class for causing a ruckus while images of a naked prophet were shown. But the story it emerged in March was made up. She was never there. The judicial investigation is continuing, and no trial is expected for at least a year. Why does it take so long for cases to go to court now? There's very little doubt about what happened in this case. I sometimes get the impression that these trials are put off for as long as possible so that the possibility of any political change resulting from political outrages is diminished. The killing in a northern Paris suburb has had lasting effects, in part because France views schools as hallowed ground, places where citizens are forged through learning the right to question everything, accept differences, believe in God or not, and place the values of the Republic above those of their particular ethnic or religious identity. And I will have more to say about that subject when I review Roger Scruton's book, The West and the Rest, on Friday. A front-page banner headline on Thursday in the French daily newspaper Le Monde, Paty, a lasting trauma, captured a sense of shock that is not entirely abated. A Samuel Paty Square in the 5th arrondissement of Paris was inaugurated Saturday. That sense of shock was reflected Friday as Paty's death was commemorated across the country. A group of imams from the Grand Mosque in Paris laid a wreath outside the school where Paty had taught in Conflans Sainte-Honorine. The tensions in French society that led to the killing, however, were evident in the fact that the Education Ministry gave teachers the option of holding a debate on the beheading if they believed a minute of silence would be interrupted by heckling. The killing of Paty by an 18-year-old Chechen refugee, Abdualakak Anzarov, who was shot dead by the police, has intensified debate on security and immigration, radicalized politics in the run-up to the presidential election next year, and prompted intense scrutiny of the French secular model known as laïcité. In some ways, France is approaching a Samuel Paty election dominated by the right because the left has found no answer to overwhelming concerns about security. An online poll published in April by the Journal du Dimanche indicated that 86% of French people view security as a major electoral issue, up from 60% a year earlier. These are the fears that have caused an insurgent far-right TV pundit and polemicist, Eric Symmore, to gain popularity with his anti-immigrant talk, even though he is not yet a declared candidate. David Futry, a history teacher at a high school in Dreux, about 50 miles west of Paris, said that since the killing of Paty, he, quote, feels a constant mission of memory to explain why we can criticize religion, why freedom of conscience is important, and why laïcité matters, unquote. France is, in theory, a non-discriminatory society where the state upholds strict religious neutrality. It is a nation that, in its now questioned universalist self-image, dissolves differences of faith and ethnicity in a shared commitment to the rights and responsibilities of French citizenship. That was the lay model Paty tried to set out to his class, paying with his life. But some French Muslims and other immigrants see this supposedly colorblind blueprint for a society of liberty, fraternity, and equality as no more than an exercise in hypocrisy that masks widespread discrimination. And the investigation into the killing has revealed that Shanina, through videos and Facebook, spread his daughter's false account of what Paty had done. It was understandably false because she was not there and made up her version. This did not prevent an Islamist radical, Abdel Hakim Sefroui, from making a YouTube video based on Shanina's work that named Paty's school. The online storm grew, and Anzarov, the young Chechen, alerted to it, decided to buy a knife. The French people are strongly attached to their school, so this was a point of rupture for all teachers and for the nation, says Emmanuel Menetre, a history teacher at a school near Dijon. A Samuel Paty amendment adopted by the Senate this year makes it a crime punishable by 3 years in prison to spread personal information that puts someone's life in danger. Yes, so there is a piece that appeared on October 12th, the UN's review, called The Symmore Phenomenon. Can Francis Tucker Carlson retake France for patriots? France is abuzz with the news that Symmore, a right-wing pundit, may run in the country's presidential elections set for April 2022. Polls already have Symmore enjoying double-digit support and potentially even beating Marine Le Pen and the mainstream conservative candidates, thus making him run off against sitting President Emmanuel Macron in the second round. Symmore would, according to these same polls, win around 45% of the vote in this scenario. That's short of a victory, but this early in the game, it's exactly the kind of level of support Brexit and Donald Trump received before their triumphs in 2016. But who is Eric Symmore? The pundit has been virtually a household name in France for many years. He is akin to Tucker Carlson in America, just about the only voice in the TV news media who effectively, though usually not explicitly, defends the interests of the nation's core ethnic demographic. Occasionally, mainstream journalists forget to keep their biases subtle and covered. One journalist at the France Info public TV station said Symmore is not allowed to come here. The channel then publicly contradicted the journalist and clarified that Symmore would be invited only when he had officially become a candidate. Symmore has successfully built up his profile on the right-wing edge of the media system. He has long worked for the conservative newspaper Le Figaro and broke through on TV talk shows in which he was noted for his criticism of feminism and professional anti-racist activism. He has been periodically fired by certain media for going too far. He has often been dragged into court by said anti-racist lobbying groups. Symmore has been able to flourish despite these setbacks, keeping gainful employment in a critical section of the French media. Symmore is technically still not a candidate for the election. However, things came to a head earlier this year as he set up a political party, recruited staff, and raised funds. Symmore's idea is the defense of French interests, including the native French. The best place to start for English speakers is probably the recent interview he gave to a Hungarian think tank on the occasion of Prime Minister Viktor Orbán's fourth demographic summit. This event, focused on opposing immigration and supporting European families and fertility, was itself very noteworthy and included the participation of the prime ministers of Czechia, Serbia, and Slovenia. In the interview, Symmore explicitly mentions France's white identity with a suitable quote from General Charles de Gaulle, who said that the French were, quote, a European people of white race, Greek and Latin culture, and Christian religion, unquote. Both add that while some non-whites and Muslims may become French citizens, the nation would lose her identity if these groups cease to be a small minority. In the French media, few have been as explicit as Symmore in denouncing the ills of Afro-Islamic immigration and the results in terms of criminality, welfare abuse, and day-to-day Islamization. Those who want a more detailed expose of Symmore's views, read my review of his longest work, Les Suicides Français, a meticulous examination of the steady decay of the French nation over the past 50 years. The book sold an estimated 300,000 copies. In Symmore's politics, France is the be-all, end-all. He is enamored with the nation who gave citizenship to the Jews during the French Revolution, enabling his own people to flourish, and with the glory that France was able to achieve under great leaders such as Napoleon Bonaparte and Charles de Gaulle. Symmore has plenty of critics, including among patriotic dissidents. One such critic is the anti-Zionist civic nationalist Alain Soral, who asks, why is Symmore allowed to speak to the media in the way he does? Jean-Marie Le Pen, who has long made similar comments, enjoyed no such privilege, but was viciously demonized. Is Symmore not allowed to rise because, wittingly or not, he serves the interest of the global oligarchy, which wishes to see France weakened, paralyzed, and bled by fatal internal conflict, namely the ethno-religious civil war, which Symmore is effectively promoting? I personally do not find the Sorelian critique convincing. He fails to recognize the fact that there are differing factions within the French and global oligarchies. Indeed, Donald Trump was able to win the U.S. presidency precisely by exploiting these divisions. He governed with the support of ultra-Zionists who won a great deal for Israel. America won a bit too, though admittedly much less, with drastic reductions in border crossings and refugee settlements. Now, if you look at the comments at this UNS's site, I can't say that I was surprised. About 80 to 90% of them are ferocious ranting against the Jews. That Symmore is a Jew, so therefore he is damned and, well, should not be listened to. At Jacobin, which is a left-wing site named after a terrorist faction, France's fascist pundit, Eric Symmore, is winning already. And this actually made me laugh out loud. Even the possibility of Symmore being a serious contender also marks a wider turn to obsessive identitarian politics, which he himself has done much to catalyze. Oh, yes, because the progressives, they hate identitarianism. We don't care what color you are or what your sexual preference is, etc., etc., etc. No. We're leftists. So we have no truck with intersectionality. I just, these should be good times for leftists. I mean, classical leftists, but they're not, because the movement has been taken over by crazies. And Eric Symmore is he's all over the news these days. I mean, the English language news, from Peter Allen and Chris Dewars in the Mail. Far-right pundit Eric Symmore, tipped to become next president of France, is slammed for pointing a sniper rifle at journalists at an arms fair and saying, "It's serious now, eh? Get back, move." Well, if I didn't love this guy before, I certainly do now. And other people would make an apology. No, he's not going to. The Queen is dragged into French firearms row as far-right Macron rival Eric Symmore posts picture of her holding a rifle after he sparked outrage by waving a gun at journalists and telling them to back off at an arms show. And finally, and this is from the London Times, Paris Match editor sacked after cover of presidential hopeful Eric Symmore with assistant 28. The magazine announced a change of editor today amid a row over compromising photos of Eric Symmore, the far-right pundit who is expected to run for the French presidency. Hervé Gattegno lost his job as editor a month after putting on the magazine's front cover a photograph of Symmore, 63, embracing Sarah Nafo, his 28-year-old assistant on the French Riviera. The scoop angered Symmore, who announced that he was taking legal action for breach of privacy, but it did nothing to stop his rise to the forefront of the French political scene on the back of his attacks on immigration and Islam. So I'm looking at a picture of the young lady, and I'm thinking, does anyone believe that Paris Match, alerting the world, in France, to the fact that a 63-year-old man, apparently his girlfriend is an attractive 28-year-old, that this is going to hurt him politically in France? France has very strict privacy protections, so strict that François Mitterrand, after his death, we learned that he had parallel families. That is to say that he had a wife and several children with his wife, and he had another wife, well, not exactly a wife, not legally, and several children with her, and he would go back and forth regularly between the two families. And I don't know, that might be useful information for voters to have, but in France, they didn't get it because of privacy laws. So in just a minute, I am going to move on to Theodore Thursday. And just let me open up some tabs here with the material that I need to talk about. And this will just take a few more seconds. Yes, Soren Kierkegaard. I'll have something to say about him. And is that it? Is that all the tabs? I think that's all the tabs. Oh, one more. Let's have a quick look at the chat before I dive in to the movie. Okay. And what does the chat have to say? Dionysus says, I'm in complete agreement with Greg Johnson. White nationalism is inescapably anti-Semitic. Well, I've said this before. I'll say it again. And I'm not being coy. I am not a white nationalist, among other reasons, because I don't know what white nationalism is or even could be. We all have our nations, you know. There is no white nation. Hello to Ashiman Bravo. Ashiman Bravo says, sadly, Jacques Chirac had to accept French fries being renamed freedom fries. I'm reminded that the Hungarian dwarf, Nicolas Sarkozy, he played along with anti-immigrant sentiment when he railed against the residents of what they call the banlieues in outside Paris as being racailles, which means scum. Of course, he didn't follow up on this. I have to say the French have been very clever about this. What's happened in America's cities, and it's happening in Canadian cities, is the white people get chased out to the suburbs, and the cities are surrendered to the racailles. In Paris, the white people, the Frenchmen, they hold Paris, and the racailles have been banished to the banlieues. Of course, one of the results of that is, and I suppose this is, a big victory for mankind's eternal enemy, carbon, is that car usage in the Paris area has risen greatly in recent years because Parisians are afraid to get on the trains that venture outside Paris. Too many people being attacked, too many women being sexually molested, etc., etc. Okay, what else do we have here? Remember the Islamists were attacking seemingly every day or week, and then it just stopped? Well, Michel Houellebecq wrote a novel called Submission, in which he predicted, and this is coming true, that the media will just stop reporting this. Of course, when a school teacher gets beheaded, that's the kind of thing that's going to, it's going to come out eventually. Let's see, those Islamist fanatics, thankfully there are only a few, says Mary Crow. That's really irrelevant. We have polling data which indicates exceedingly strong support for Sharia law and support for whatever measures, terror bombing, the like. This is how the IRA flourished in England. No, that weren't that many Irish terrorists living in England in the 1970s and 1980s. However, there were a great many Irish English who kept stum about the whole business, that the IRA terrorists in England could not have done what they did without the support of their country people in that country. Okay, let's move on here. Theater Thursday, and I'm talking about a film today by a Danish director called Carl Theodore Dreyer. Now, I suppose I'm going to be mispronouncing a whole bunch of names here, and, well, I'm not going to apologize for that because Danish pronunciation is a complete mystery to me. I've been calling the movie we're going to talk about today Ordet, but the Danes, I find out, pronounce it Orl, like that. So no, I'm not. So I'm not going to do it. Dreyer was born in 1889 and died in 1968. And his major films are Michael from 1924, Master of the House from 1925, The Passion of Joan of Arc from 1928. This is a film which is considered one of the greatest ever made. I have to say that I agree with Robert Bresson that it is overwrought, and I much prefer Bresson's The Trial of Joan of Arc. In 1932, he made a film called Vampire, which is about vampires. 1943, Day of Wrath, which is about witchcraft, or more to the point, witch hunters. And Ordet came out in 1959, and his final film was called Gertrude. Dreyer would have made many more films, but you see the problem. There are not very many people in the world who speak Danish. So it is difficult for filmmakers in Denmark working in the Danish language to get recognition anywhere in the world. More important, to get funding to make films. And there were many films that Dreyer would have liked to have made, but simply couldn't because there were no funds available. Ordette, as I mentioned previously, means the word. And it is based on a play by Kaj Munk, and I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that, who was a Lutheran priest, that is to say, a priest or pastor of the Danish National Church, who is a Danish national hero because he made his objections, very strong objections, known to the German occupation of Denmark. And despite being banned from speaking, he continued to do so. And after he gave a sermon at the beginning of the Advent season, he was kidnapped from his church and murdered and dumped on a road, outside a road. In Ordette, right near the beginning of the film, we see a stone cross in a field. This is actually the gravestone, Munk's gravestone. As Ordette was filmed, the outdoor scenes were filmed in Munk's village. This is a religious film, and it touches on many difficult questions. The Age of Miracles. Is the Age of Miracles over? Well, most of the people in the movie believe that the Age of Miracles is, in fact, over. That the Age of Miracles ended with Jesus Christ. The question of conversion. What does conversion mean? Conversion to Christianity. Forgiveness. I suppose the importance and the difficulty of forgiveness. And, well, faith. What is faith capable of? When people say that they are Christians, that they have faith, what do they mean by that? How strong is their faith? You know, with God, anything is possible. Well, do people really believe that? Or are they just words that they mouth? So, the central characters in this film are a farming family, the Borgens. And they are quite prosperous. We can see their home is beautifully, wonderfully furnished. It is clear that they have money, that their farm is doing very well. But it is not a happy house for many reasons. Morten, who is the patriarch, played by Henrik Malberg, is a Lutheran. He attends church. I mean, he is a believer, but his belief has been sorely tested for several reasons. His son, Johannes, played by Preben Lerdof-Rai, is a lunatic. He believes himself to be Jesus Christ. I mean, literally. This was a commonplace in a more religious age, just as lunatic asylums often had many people who believed they were Napoleon at one time. Johannes has his own room, which is filled with his books, but he frequently escapes out into the fields in order to give sermons to an imaginary or invisible congregation. And there is panic whenever he leaves the house because of the fear that he's going to disappear or that something bad is going to happen to him. Morten blames himself for Johannes's madness because he believed that Johannes was an exceedingly intelligent young man with a great thirst for God. And his father pressed him into theological studies, believing that he was the man who could lead to a recrudescence of Christianity in Denmark. What happened? Well, I suppose in the only funny line in the movie, he says that he went mad after studying Kierkegaard. Soren Kierkegaard, he was very, very popular, in the 1960s and the 1970s. He's often called an existentialist. He wrote a great many books on many, many subjects, Christianity being one of them. And I'm told, I believe it was Malcolm Muggeridge, who said that in Denmark, don't be a Soren is rather like when the English tell someone, don't be a dismal Desmond or a dismal Dora. Now, some of Morton's other sadness derives from the fact that his son, Mikkel, is an atheist. He's such an atheist that he doesn't have faith in the idea of faith itself. His wife, Inger, is not an atheist. She is a believer, a very pious woman who believes that prayers may not seem to be answered, but God is always listening and changing the world in a myriad of ways because of the prayers that we make to Him. This is a very happy marriage that they have, and it is quite delightful to see a depiction of a happy marriage, of a man and wife who love each other. It's pretty rare, especially these days. There is one other child, Anders, who is, I don't know, I suspect he's 18, 19, 20 years old. The sadness there is that he is besotted with a young woman called Anne. Only the problem is that her father, Peter Peterson, who is the regional tailor, belongs to a sect of the Lutheran Church in Denmark called the Inner Mission, a pietist sect. And yes, pretty much everything in the world is wicked, they believe. I'll have more to say about the religious conflict between Morton and Peter later. Now, Inger is very fond of what she calls Pop. She calls him grandfather. But Morton is disappointed in her as well because she has given her husband 2 children, but they are both girls. And Morton needs a son. He needs someone to carry on the family farm. She has promised Morton. She is pregnant when the film begins. She has promised Pop a son, and later we see the danger in such promises, and particularly in such promises, being taken seriously, being believed. Now, Morton, we see that he's become actually estranged from Christianity. I must say that the actor who plays him, Henrik Malmberg, he has this remarkable look about him. He always seems to be staring off into the distance, the 1,000-yard stare. It's quite disconcerting. Of course, Johannes's, Frankenstein-like gait and this strange, rather terrifying voice that he adopts when he is prophesying, they are rather hair-raising as well. Now, the marriage between Anders and Anne, it has trouble at both ends. That Inger brings it up, that she serves as the intermediary, that Anders has gone to see Peter Peterson, and Inger lets Morton know after a period of time, I suppose, so he doesn't go racing after him to stop him. And Morton says, no, I am not going to allow my boy to marry these lunatics, as he believes them to be, in the pietist sect. And when Anders appears at Peter Peterson's house, Peterson is really quite rude to him, which is unusual in this film. The Danes, or at least the Danes in the 1930s, which is when this film was set, seem to be remarkably polite people, at least the ones who live in the countryside. Peter tells Anders, Anders says, why? Because you're not good enough, he says. Now, other people, more decent people, would have put it differently, that the religious differences between your family and mine are too great to be bridged. But no, Peter insists on personalizing this. Now, Morton, who had been staunchly opposed to the marriage, when he finds out from his weeping son Anders that he is not good enough, according to Peter, he decides that he is in favor of the marriage now. And one can see that he does this largely to spite Peter, the tailor. They have a meeting that Anders and Morton go to the house of Peter, and there is a sect meeting going on, and they politely wait till the end of it, until Morton takes it up with Peter, and Peter says that you're not a Christian, that anyone who is a Lutheran cannot be a Christian, because they have rejected Jesus Christ and they are going to hell. He makes this explicit, and he goes so far as to say that you need to suffer more so that you will be able to recognize the truth. And Peter becomes almost giddy with excitement when there is a phone call from the Borgen house that Inga has gone into labor, and apparently it is a very difficult labor, and Inga's life could be in danger. And Peter actually says, I want her to die so that you will suffer, and this suffering will lead you from the wrong path to the right path. Morton is understandably infuriated by this, and he shouts at him, and he hits him, not very seriously. And Peter shouts, I have witnesses. It's not very, I want to think that he could have come up with a better line than that. So the Borgens race back to the farm where they find the midwife, and the doctor has arrived. And of course, the doctor is a man of science who finds the idea of Christianity risible. There is an amusing interaction between him and the pastor. When the new pastor, when the pastor had first shown up, that Inger had said that, he seems a very pleasant fellow, and Morton had said he's paid to be that way. So the pastor and the gynecologists are talking, and this question of miracles comes up. And the pastor says that, well, of course, God is capable of anything, of any miracle, but there are no more miracles. Why? Because that would violate the laws of the universe. And this greatly amuses the doctor, who says, what about Jesus's miracles? And the pastor says, oh, well, that was a different time, and there were special circumstances. And the doctor quite logically says, oh, I see. When the laws of the universe are broken, the physical laws of the universe are broken. Oh, if there's special circumstances, then that can happen. So the pregnancy, the birthing by Inger, it does not go well. Now, if I tell you what happens in this film, I don't know, the last half hour of it, it would rather spoil it for anyone who's not seen it. I'll just say that this is one of the most intense films I have ever seen. A word of warning, this film is a little over 2 hours long, and it is a slow film. Slow. It's a character study. It's not plot driven. Let's put it that way. And one has to immerse oneself in this Danish world in order to appreciate the film. I suppose there's a lot of people who watch 10 or 15 minutes of it and then give up. Well, I would counsel people not to give up because it will pay off. I would describe the experience of watching this film as being emotionally overwhelming. I want to say something about the filmmaking techniques that Dreyer and his cinematographer Henning Benson employs in Ordet. The one-point perspective, looking down the middle, your eyes drawn to the middle. And this is a technique, of course, that Stanley Kubrick used. There's a well-known video. It's a compilation of one-point perspective. But you see that Dreyer liked long takes, as did Stanley Kubrick, because long takes, they increase the level of tension. And this is a very tense film. Of course, Hitchcock experimented with very long takes as well around this time. We see a great use of panning in this film. Well, first of all, about the one-point perspective, you see even when the characters are moving, the camera pans to keep them at the center of the frame. And there are some just a great number of gorgeous compositions. I mean, Dreyer and the cinematographer really knew how to dress a frame. That there are very few cuts in the greater part of the movie. There are more cuts at the beginning and at the end. But we see a great many lovely tracking shots in the film. And we see the fine set decoration in it that Dreyer supervised. I mean, he was very hands-on in this respect. And the movement of the actors, the blocking of the actors is so precise that one could use the word choreography to describe it. Because it's not really a question of the camera capturing people in motion. It's more a question of these actors moving for the camera, for moving in a way that Dreyer wanted in order to present the most intense cinema experience. This is a black and white film. Unlike in his Joan of Arc film, there's not a lot of close-ups in this film, although there is a famous one at the end of the movie. We get a lot of medium shots. There's a beautiful scene of mourners, and there's a pan all the way to the end of the room and then all of the way back. Gorgeous, gorgeous shot. He uses, Dreyer uses dissolves, ending a scene with a dissolve, and then beginning a scene with a dissolve. But there is one section in a hunt, one of the hunts for Johannes, where interestingly, he uses screen wipes from right to left and from left to right in order to end and to open scenes. I mean, this film is just a masterclass in the emotional use of cinematography. If you want to see this film, it's not available on Amazon Prime. It is available if you subscribe to the Criterion channel. As far as physical media, I don't know whether the Criterion put out a box set of several of his films, which was DVD, not Blu-ray. Criterion has not brought out Blu-rays of the Dreyer titles, which they had put out on a DVD. But, and once again, you need an all regions Blu-ray player for this. But there is a beautiful box, which I own, called the Carl Theodore Dreyer Collection, which is published by the British Film Institute, which does outstanding work. And it contains Master of the House, Day of Wrath, Odette and Gertrude, and many other films. And there's just a wealth of special features. Oh, it also includes the 90-minute documentary about Dreyer called My Métier. And you can get that at Amazon.com for only $44, which is a really outstanding investment. So those are my thoughts about Odette. And I put that on my list I made a few years ago of my 52 favorite films. So let's look at what is coming up on Theater Thursday. Of course, this is all based on, the assumption that if I manage to get out of here, obviously I'm going to be spending a couple of days setting up a new household. I mean, God willing. So the dates might change. October 28th, which is 3 days before Halloween, I've picked an appropriate film, a horror film by Georges Franju from 1960 called Eyes Without a Face. On November the 4th, I'm going to be discussing Babylon Berlin. I have seen all three seasons now. Apparently there are more to come. But I've seen seasons 1 to 3, and I'll be talking about that. On November the 11th, I'm going to be discussing David Mamet's film Homicide. And on November the 18th, I'm going to be discussing Peter Brook's 1963 black and white classic, Lord of the Flies. Of course, this film was remade by an American studio in an atrocious version. No surprise there. On the book club, tomorrow I'm going to be discussing, as previously mentioned, Roger Scruton's The West and the Rest. And October 29th, again, Halloween week, I'm going to be discussing Bret Easton Ellis's American Psycho. On November the 5th, Joseph de Maistre's The Executioner. On November the 12th, Robert Louis Stevenson's Treasure Island. On November the 19th, I Shot a Man in Reno by Graham Thompson. On Music Monday, October 25th, I'm going to be talking about some scary music videos, and there will be 2 by Aphex Twin in there. And if you know Aphex Twin, then you know which videos I'm talking about. Chris Cunningham videos. On November the 1st, I'm going to be discussing Mozart and De Ponte's Don Giovanni. On November the 8th, The Cult of the Performer. On November 15th, Where It's At Beck. And on November 22nd, Disco Demolition Night, July the 12th, 1979, at Comiskey in Chicago. As I previously said, this was the last time the white working class in America was allowed to have anything important to say about culture. So let's have a final look at the chat. Actually, mean bravo. Okay. Pop Science Liberal Mainstream YouTube channel ASAP Science uploaded a video recently saying that the brain neurochemically resets to the state of never having watched porn before after 3 months of no FAP. Hello, Glib Medley. James Badge Dale was in the atrocious version, says Ann Run. Andy, no. Okay, I don't really want to get into that. I don't know why people talk about this in public. Did Trump really have bone spurs during the era of the Vietnam War draft? I don't know. Again, Trump managed to dodge America's least favorite war. So did Dick Cheney. Dick Cheney actually was asked about this years later, and he said that being in the military was not a priority for him at the time. And of course, Dick Cheney is one of the most notorious warmongers of American history. Ashley Bravo, I have weighed in on the Dave Chappelle controversy. And Run says, +1 unrisible, great word indeed. That's originally Glib Medley who said that. Don Willis says, was watching I, Hypocrite earlier today, young people faking Tourette's, tics, autism, along with mental illness. Yeah, it's a thing and in vogue, puke. I have noticed this. Well, I have, let's say I know people who are millennials. I won't say more than that. Listing the conditions, the mental conditions they supposedly have. Autism, of course, ADHD, OCD, just on and on and on and on. Why are you boasting to the rest of the world that, well, you're crazy? I suppose that there is a certain type of millennial that is attracted to this kind of talk. I have noticed that when millennials talk, not all of them, they like to swap stories about how mentally disfigured they are. It's all so tiresome. Yes, cognitive dissonant, mental illness is now a status symbol. Don Willis says, I dated a dismal Dora in my youth. Now lunatics believe they are misgendered, says cognitive dissonance. Don Willis, I admire KMG for giving a disclaimer for his poor Dutch, well, Danish, actually. My understanding is that people who speak, if you speak Swedish, Norwegian, or Danish, that you can basically understand that the other Scandinavian languages. It's not going to be the same. Probably get some words wrong, but if a Danish person speaks to a Swede in his native language, then the Swede will understand. Of course, Finland is completely out there. The only European language that Finnish is related to is Hungarian, oddly enough. Okay, that is it for today. I will be back tomorrow, Friday, with the book club. Thank you all for tuning in. As I mentioned previously, I hope tomorrow will be my last Crypsis cast, and I will have found a suitable alternative to the platform that I am on now. If you would like to make a donation to this live stream, which would be greatly appreciated because I'm in a rather dire situation with regards to accommodation. My PayPal account is kevin_grace@hotmail.com. Once again, kevin_grace@hotmail.com. If you are in Canada, donations to the live stream may be made directly via Interac at kevingrace@shaw.ca. And as always, I leave you with this. In these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.